reference to this idea that because we need oil so badly, that it justifies our right to intervene in other countries. And so it seems to me there's also a legal and moral opposing argument that says that, well, nations have the right to their autonomy, and they also have the right to do what they will with their national resources, and it doesn't allow for other countries to basically invade and pillage as we saw in empires past, just out of need for that resource. And I find that lacking. I've gone to several events this week, and this issue of oil has come up repeatedly, as if it's oxygen and we need it to breathe or else we will die. And I just would like to see that addressed a bit more, especially from the legal perspective and moral perspective. And I believe John Rawls referred to it as the original position, sort of remove ourselves from it and say, well, what if some other country decided they needed, corn, and they had the right to invade the United States to take our resources? How would we feel about that? And then of course there's also the golden rule. So I'd just like to see that addressed from a legal, moral perspective.
Perhaps because media is being consolidated and the power in various medias is going to very wealthy people who want more wealth and more power, that the opinions that are given out, not as opinions, of course, but as fact, is somewhat very subtly distorted to influence people who are listening or watching to have views that they would not otherwise have if they had access to quote-unquote objective knowledge or facts.
Every war in the Middle East since World War II has been about oil. I think it's also safe to say that there is a general agreement on the official level never to say that. So it's a taboo subject. In other words, you can talk about exploring democracy, you can talk about weapons of mass destruction, if everybody forgot that you had shipped them to the same target, and so on and so on, but you're not going to say that the war is about access to oil. I'm sorry that I didn't make it clear that there is a moral, a legal, a political dimension, a series of violations related that come with that. Of course, I totally agree with you that emphasis should be placed on that. The agreement not to do, the agreement in practice, the agreement not to talk about oil in Iraq was characteristic of the early justification of the war. And I found that totally remarkable, that people would actually imagine that any of the other nonsense that had been offered was accurate. U.S. interest, that's why I said that, U.S. interest in the so-called primal core is exclusively about oil. The U.S. isn't the only power, but it comes, there is again a very explicit understanding and agreement, and it is articulated that access to oil may require the use of force. Now, a lot of subjects come in here. Among them, what's the relationship between private oil companies and the state? That's an important issue in the whole political system in the establishment, going back to 45 to the present. So I think that unlike you, I feel that there's in fact a lot of written material that addresses this point.
I guess I don't believe that it's not out there. I just feel like somehow the argument is made. I've seen consistently that because we need it, it somehow justifies this intervention. And then on the flip side, I agree with you completely that there's been much out there, including at the anti-war rallies before the war, saying no war for oil and populations in the Middle East protesting, but they were somehow written off as conspiracy theorists. And I'm interested as well, maybe to hear from A Zinn about how this deceit, basically, of the populace, that this is a conspiracy theory, somehow is able to perpetuate future wars.
Right. And I would just say one point here that maybe brings these two points together on the media. the media has played a significant role in this. If you look at works, the media has played a significant role, and so has the internet in informing people. And I think, I'm sure that to the extent that you have time to do something other than your own work, which is, of course, open to question, but you know that most of us spend a good part of our lives on the web, right? Getting other sources of information. And there's an agreement that you can't rely on conventional media to mainstream media. Books by recent books, relatively recent books by Richard Falk on the New York Times coverage of Iraq, and then a separate book that he did on the treatment of the Israeli-Palestinian question are very, very revealing. But there are many others, going back to Chomsky's Manufacturing Consent, that explain the function of the media, the role of the media. I agree with you. I think that the media has not been very useful. It's been complicit in putting this issue aside. And that's a major problem. And the concentration of power in the media is a long-term story against which there are many who struggle. One very an old Cantabrigian, Danny Schechter, who used to call himself the news dissector, is one of many. But there are many sources that one can access. The problem is that struggle of accessing alternative material when you're in an environment where it is consistently denied puts you in a very difficult situation, because you're going against the grain. That's why, of course, the issue of oil ought to be on the first page, and accurate, as you say, not as a justification, but as an explanation. And as an explanation of the question of who benefits. It's not just oil. It's all the corporate expansion that's allied to oil that are among the great beneficiaries of the Iraq War.
There's another footnote to what I've been saying about the absence of the word oil from the discourse, both from the government and the media, that their sort of fear that people will think about oil as the source of our violence in the Middle East. I recall that as the Senate in 1991 was discussing the question of whether we go to war, one of those rare instances in which Congress actually had a discussion about whether we should go to war. But there was a debate in the Senate on the question of the war resolution for the first Gulf War, and I was watching that debate on television, astonished at the fact that the debate was actually taking place. And at a certain point in the debate, these people in the gallery unfurled this huge banner, which they had somehow concealed in their shoes or something, which said, "No blood for oil." And this lasted for 10 seconds on the television screen, because immediately they were swooped down on by the security police and taken out of the place, so that people could not watch that "no blood for oil" for more than 10 seconds. But that's illustrative of how fearful they are of oil. But it's true, there's a defense in depth. There's a defense in depth is this, that one, you ignore the question of oil. And two, if people say, yeah, but it is discovered, yes, it is oil. And then people say, yeah, but we need the oil, which is right, what Irene was talking about. Well, there's several answers to that. One, how much oil do we need? How much oil do Americans consume? How greedy can we be? We use twice as much oil per capita as people in Western Europe, and our standard of living is not that much higher than people in Western Europe, and maybe lower. And this is the moral issue. What right do we have to have twice as much oil per capita as anybody else? And beyond that, what right do we have to use force to get something that we want? We're totally opposed to force internally. If people use force because somebody else has something that they want, right? We call it robbery. We call it breaking and entering. We call it assault. We call it a crime, right? You're not supposed to use force because you need something and somebody else has it. So yes, you have to confront, one, the ignorance about the oil as a factor, and two, the moral question of, do we have a right to kill other people for oil?